And now, to introduce our moderator, Steve Shah, from Automation Everywhere. Steve Shah is the SVP of Product for Information Anywhere, where he drives product and marketing strategy for multiple automation products. His experience with bringing AI crosses bringing new products to market, privacy, security, and governance considerations, and engagement with customers on concrete solutions. Prior to his recent work on AI, Steve held extensive experience in process and task automation, cloud-scale network, infrastructure for web and security and networks and applications. He's a published author with Osborne McGraw-Hill with books that have sold over 100,000 copies covering Linux and content networking. Please welcome our moderator and our panel to continue the conversation of AI in enterprise.
Well, excellent. Thank you, everybody. And glad we got everybody back after coffee breaks, because that's not always a sure thing. So today we're talking about AI in the enterprise. And one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that we didn't just have a lot of agreement, but I also got some disagreement. So if it feels like I'm poking at my panelists, that's where I'm coming with. A little bit of dissent is good. So with that, I want to start things off with actual AI goals, because a lot of the enterprises that I know I speak with, they hear about AI, they see presentations like the one that the two of you just gave, which were fantastic. Thank you, by the way. And they're still sorting out what their goals are. And so just from a top level, where are a lot of enterprises going with their goals? And maybe Gopi, if you don't mind kicking things off.
Yeah. So it is true that every enterprise now has looked at it and is very aware that AI is going to be very dramatic. And all of them are asking the question, where should I use it? What should I be starting with? And I will say, after having many conversations, a lot of them are also moving slowly. They're hesitant, sometimes even a little confused, because people like Ron come and do these great presentations, say, it can affect every aspect of your enterprise. And often the CEO, CMO saying, where should I start? Mm-hmm. And often the temptation is to go towards something that seems fairly easy to do, like productivity is one case that is mentioned, employee productivity, and the other one that I'm seeing is customer support, because they see conversational AI. And since you said you encourage dissent, and I'd like to dissent by saying, I'll go back to what I said in my talk, which is start with what is strategically most important for you, for your business, and then see what is the biggest opportunity in front of you as a business in the next 1 to 3 years, and then work backwards and say, how can I use AI to solve for that problem? I think that's where we'll see the most interesting use cases. Having said that, the actual real adoption rate, where there is actual productivity benefits for enterprises, is still estimated to be less than 5%.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you had brought up yesterday was follow the consumer market, which was an interesting insight, especially coming from an enterprise perspective. Yeah. We typically think B2B, but the reality is that the end product is always a consumer. And so being able to back up and understand those trends becomes very important as well. Yeah. It gives us guidance about what the adoption will look like in the enterprise.
Yeah. If I can add in a good example, and Ron was mentioning the case of Amazon with Rufus. And even before we got to Rufus, all of you are actually interacting with AI without realizing it. If I were to use Amazon as an example, when you shop in the last 5-10 years, you might have been seeing a suggestion saying you may also like, or people who bought this also bought this item, and that prompts you to go consider things that you may not have thought of. And that's an AI-powered recommendation engine, algorithmically figuring out what else should you be looking at. And that's driving about 35% of sales in Amazon. Or Netflix, for example, when you notice the amount of time people are spending looking for what to watch. With an AI-powered recommendation engine, you now get recommendations as to what is the next show you should explore based on interests you've demonstrated before. And that's reduced the time from about 20 plus minutes to about 3 minutes now for the average consumer. So those are examples of AI actually solving for a consumer problem and changing the experience associated with that particular product or service.
Excellent. Ran, you're also somebody who speaks to a lot of customers. And so I was hoping you could share some of the things that you've seen that represent the goals that your customers have in terms of adopting AI and what they want to see from it.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of it kind of aligned with what Gopi just shared is after the ChatGPT launch, we received like tons of interest, asking us of like what use case they should focus on. But we always goes back to like, what is your business challenge? Then we decide, okay, what is the right technology to solve that business challenge? And in the past year or two, we've seen like a flourish of POC, like pretty much, all the retail customers and CPG, they're doing a lot of POCs. However, there's been concern about to like go to production due to sometimes it's like costly, as well as when they go to production, they need to really think about the infrastructure. Do I continue using the managed service, or should I go like on-prem solution? So it is a sophisticated decision process the enterprise has to go through. And I think at this stage, with a lot of the pilot going on and some of the more advanced, tech forward company like Amazon has rolled out generative AI use case, we will continue. We expect to see more company in our space will follow this. And also we've seen other kind of use case, more like customer-facing use case will start to emerge, and as well as the use case will improve the operation efficiency. That's another key, I think a key pain point for the enterprise like companies we've seen.
I want to break open the operational efficiency part, because a lot of the examples that tend to come out about AI tend to be very front office driven, right? What is facing the customer, what is facing the end user? We don't tend to talk as much about the AI that's getting used in the back office, a little more operationally focused and so on. Sharon, I imagine that you see a lot of that coming from a CIO's perspective. What's actually happening in the back office? Are the back office folks adopting this, or are they staying procedural?
Well, we see in like finance, people are trying to use the technology. We're certainly using it for things like forecasting and making predictions, because AI is reasonably good at that if you have a sound model. However, in this kind of Gen AI excitement, asking questions around financials where you have to actually be right, probabilistic models don't always generate correct answers without a lot of additional work surrounding them. So the adoption there is definitely slower going to production. But we're looking at the operational efficiency, not just in kind of the back office, but across the entire corporation. Everything from how do we make our engineers more efficient. We have customers who, they're very large customers. In some cases, they have almost bespoke releases of our software. They're telco providers, and they want their network to work the way they want their network to work. So when we do new releases, engineers write notes about which customers this will affect. And as we all know, engineers are not necessarily customer-facing people. So we used to have a lot of people who would translate that into cleaner documentation. And now that has been completely, almost completely automated. It still has the human in the loop. And so these use cases where things used to take a long period of time and then there was a decision, and then a long period of time and a decision, have shown themselves to be really good in this Gen AI space, because there's a person there evaluating it and making it a decision. When it's, I need an answer to a specific question and that answer has to be right, that's where, especially across a broad knowledge base, with precision, that's where we're seeing challenges rolling things to production and getting them to a level that, and doing the user change management for the times that it's maybe not right, and how do they know and they not take twice as much time validating as they did asking the question, that the answer they got back is a correct answer.
You touch on something really important, and that is, especially now when we talk about AI, there's a tendency to automatically assume generative AI. But you're reminding us that the scope of AI is a lot broader. I know, Gopi, you and I talked about this yesterday. it's not just generative AI. There's a lot of other models that exist out there that we should be mindful of as well. So given all of these changes that are happening, a lot of really positive things, but a lot of challenges that come with that, what is holding us back from just going all in? I mean, Gopi, you called out 5% is the adoption right now. That's still really small, and you would think that given how long we've been talking about AI, it would be a lot more pervasive.
So let me correct it. I'm not saying 5% of the adoption. Almost every enterprise at some level has tried out AI. I'm saying less than 5% of use cases I can point towards actual impact and productivity gains that has affected the business. Now, every enterprise will show at least one small experiment they're running with AI, but it's not had a material impact yet, and that we are yet to see. It is coming, but the timeline is slow.
Which makes perfect sense. I know that one of the challenges that I've seen a lot of discussion around with folks who are adopting this is issues of privacy and things like that. What are some of the other things that are holding us back in terms of actually making this work in real life? I don't know, Sharon, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so again, a lot of it has to do with the management of the data that feeds AI and making sure that it's protected, where is that data going and how is it being used, that it's not biased. In certain types of use cases, bias is an issue and there's regulation around that. And obviously the adoption of people who are concerned and fair, and Martin might be a better person to take that, but there are change management issues in the organization as you bring this technology in and try. One is just people don't change easily. So I'm a great example, right? I have Microsoft Copilot on my desktop, and there are certain things that it's really good at, but there's certain things I'm still faster at than it is. So I tend to fall back in my own habits and forget that it's there, right? Well, and I'm a technologist who's really passionate about this stuff. So imagine the person who doesn't understand that technology being put on their desktop, and what does that mean to their role, and how do they think differently about their role and the capabilities they can bring to the role if some of the rote work that they do goes away. So everything from regulatory issues to security issues to people issues.
So can I add to that?
Please.
So one of the issues is just simply scale and inertia. Big companies move a little slowly. We are still at the stage where a lot of amazing demos can be shown. Like Ron showed the example, Ren showed the example of L'Oreal with the 3D rendering of one of the products, which is great to watch on stage like this. But if you look at a company like Coca-Cola, they operate in 191 countries, and there are marketing teams all over. So taking a concept like that and making it roll across the organization where every marketing team is using it, and they have multiple products and divisions, this takes a huge amount of effort. And that's why while this technology is developing in quarters, as I said, organization can roll out can take years or even decades. And if you look back over the two big platform shifts, the first browsers started coming around 1994 or so in consumer internet. But by the time that was adopted across banks and CPG companies, et cetera, it took a couple of decades. Same with the smartphone, 2007, the first smartphones, we all get excited, we start showing the demos. Even now, many companies' mobile website is still not optimized, and different industries adopt it at different paces. Retail would do it first, maybe financial services next. By the time it gets to auto, by the time it gets to CPG, it takes time. So it is just the arc of the adoption curve among larger enterprises that you're seeing.
But you agree that all of the software that I've ever written is flawless, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you said
you have written.
Yeah. That's a good thing that it was written 20 years ago. So those are, you said something really key there, and that is the teams that put it together. It takes a lot of people, which brings me to Martin. I wasn't going to let you get away. Martin, you're the resident person here who is thinking about teams and team structure and organizational dynamics. Help us through and understand this journey.
Right. So there's a lot of hype around this, as you know, and what I like to think about is less about how enterprises adopt this, but when they do adopt it, will the teams actually use any of this, right? And by some statistics, we know that about 75% of the workforce is already using ChatGPT or some kind of chatbot in some shape or form. But that's not the full answer, and we're not actually at a true saturation point yet. So I do a bit of research with folks at Stanford on this question, and what we're finding is what some researchers would call that there is a kind of hierarchy of worthiness that gets in the way. So how many times have you used ChatGPT to do something that is so core to your expertise that you feel just a little bit guilty that you did that? Or you'll never tell anyone that you used a chatbot because, well, that undermines somehow my expertise or my worth in this enterprise. And we're seeing that a lot of this AI is being used for things that ultimately don't really matter in terms of value generation for the enterprise. And the things that it could be really good for, people are hesitant to use it because, again, of this idea of the hierarchy of worthiness. There's another branch of research, this time from Wharton, where they look at what they call algorithm aversion. So they've established that people generally, like, when was the last time you went to your hometown and decided to override what Google Maps told you was the fastest route to your destination, right? I do that all the time when I'm back home in Manila. And they've established that there is a certain kind of algorithm aversion that people have. Now, what was interesting about that body of research was they thought, how do we overcome this somehow? What they did was they allowed people to tweak the algorithms, to have some control over the algorithms, and they wanted to see what the adoption was. What they found was that adoption increased when you give people control. What they also found was that the error rates of these models also increased. So then you're stuck with this dilemma, right? Like, do you allow people control over these algorithms at the risk of increasing its error rate, but with the benefit of increasing its adoption? And that's not an easy problem to solve, right?
So, you asked originally about what are companies' goals, and I was at one event at BCG, and one of the panelists there said, we do tend to go after the low-hanging fruit with new technology. But with this technology, perhaps we should think about something that just was never possible before, because we have limitations of our capabilities as people. And at Juniper, we're selling AI for networking. It's a product called Mist. And I think the reason it's successful and the reason it gets adopted by network teams and engineers pretty quickly is the job was really hard to do well, right? The amount of data and the speed at which that data happens in a network, when there's a problem, to troubleshoot it, you have to do something people aren't good at, which is process huge volumes of data, try to find patterns very quickly, try to create correlations, and machines are just better at it than we are. So now you have a piece of technology that can make the network engineer, instead of looking like the pariah and the guy who's not in, or the girl who's not in control of their world and of their life, look like they're on top of it. And I think us, as we think about, of course, in the context of your strategy, what are those big, impossible problems that you weren't able to solve, but you wanted to be able to solve? How do we take this technology and apply it to those? I think that that's where you'll bring this adoption and this benefit cycle together.
You kind of go down something really interesting about the power of assistive technology. AI being an assistant as opposed to something that's going to go and take over. And I think that's similar with the, how much control do you give over the model? Rand, I know that you work with a lot of companies that are in the manufacturing, packaged goods sort of universe. I imagine that the assistive aspect of it for their customers is super important, but it's also something that they want to control. Is this something that you've had experience with that you can share?
Yeah, I think back to the Coke example with WPP on the advertising, right? So I think one thing think about those CPG companies, they spend like tons of billions of money to create that brand image, and so many like brilliant marketeers, working on this product, and now the cautious part of rolling out more like generative AI, like produce ads or in a very dynamic way, that does cause some concerns in terms of hallucination, and if something is not really representing the brand image, that just destroy the whole brand. So that's a very harmful steps. So that's why those, if you think about those particular use case, enterprise has to take very cautious steps just to make sure they do tons of testing before they can roll out to consumer. But on the opposite side, what we see is, I think on the employee productivity side, there is a tons of internal use case to help the associate, the store associate, to be more productive. Because if you think about the retail industry, it is a very high turnover industry. So on the store associate, so its average is within 6 months there is a turnover. So being able to use some of the generative AI tools to do training, we've seen tons of adoption there.
Can I ask, so on this point on productivity, even that, there's still a puzzle to be solved there. Some internal research we've done recently looked at, so let's say you can generate a report or write code faster. Where does that extra time go? And what they actually find is that there are two possibilities to this answer, right? Or that they found actually from the data that time goes to two different places. So you have the maximizers and the minimizers. The maximizers, when they gain more days and more minutes in the day, the maximizers will put it towards side projects, really cool things that they've been wanting to get to that don't necessarily feed into the core business. The minimizers take longer breaks, longer lunches, bring it back. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I would love for there to be better jobs that give more flexibility to people. But then this story of we therefore can increase productivity, I think there is some leaking of, I don't think it's a very tight, it's not a watertight kind of situation where you automate something. In fact, there's a funny story, a friend of mine was telling me recently that there's a biotech company here in the Bay Area where they decided there was a big top-down push from management. Use generative AI to generate reports. Well, guess what happens? A few months later, suddenly there's so many more reports being generated. And then management is using generative AI to summarize these reports. And then at some point when things are just getting completely out of hand, they hire a big consulting firm to come in and figure out how many reports do we actually need. I'm not sure that that's what we want. No.
But this has been a question for me all along, right? Part of my job is to manage cost, and I figure out, not just in my shop, but in other places where money isn't being spent well on technology. And we'll prevent the technology from being bought and wasted, on and on. But the CFO doesn't ever take the money back, so they just go spend it on something else. This is kind of the same problem, right? It doesn't necessarily drop to the bottom line unless you have really good discipline. And I think that's another part of this journey for enterprises is there are certain companies that really take the time to measure things, and that's something new that we actually have to do with AI because AI learns and it changes. And it's not like that thing that you put in production and you knew exactly how it worked and it was deterministic, and unless something changed, either in the environment or in the code itself, it would break. AI is going to evolve over time based on the data it sees, and so you have to measure things in ways, and that's not necessarily a muscle we have around anything other than the money in the company. So I think you're gonna see, as we say, there will be certain roles that will be automated away. There's no question about that. But the thing is that there's going to be new roles created that we have to do in order to leverage this technology to its best effect.
But let's break that open, because this is, AI and automation go hand in hand, right? We see this all the time. I think, Gopi, you were referring earlier to AI automation, AI agents, and the role that they will play. This is coming whether anyone wants it or not. And so as it's coming, how does everyone prepare for that? What are the things that we should be thinking about? What are the proactive steps? Clearly everyone here is taking a proactive step by making it a point to attend an event like this. But when we look much more broadly across a large group of people, right, what does the society as a whole need to do to better prepare? This is, I'm going to throw this hard one at you.
Me?
Yeah,
Okay.
you, because I like you that much.
So I'm writing a case study right now on Waymo. And Waymo very proudly, felt really proud when they were first labeled by, I think, Bloomberg as the grandma of self-driving cars. The safest record to date. And what's interesting, if you think about self-driving cars, yes, thank you. One fan of Waymo safety record here. If you think about what happened with self-driving cars, right? Self-driving cars, in some ways, we had this moment of hype and fear mongering around AI when self-driving cars were a big topic of conversation in the 2010s, right? I think we forget that we've had this conversation over and over again over the many decades, right? What's interesting about the self-driving cars, because it had to exist within the physical world, and there were risks around crashes and safety, and there were so many guardrails to get to a point where they can even beta test this in the real world. And then you ask yourself, for generative AI, for all these chatbots, like how many guardrails did we actually put in front of any of these companies, mine included? Maybe zero. And we use cute terms like hallucinations. We don't call them misinformation necessarily, right? It's a bit of it feels a bit euphemistic. And I think there is, and I'll get off my soapbox in a sec, but I think there is a conversation we need to have as a society around what real guardrails do we put in front of software that maybe don't exist in the physical world yet. But how do we get in front of that as a society and make sure it's governed properly?
But let's take that governance back to the enterprise for a moment.
I think most companies...
Go ahead. I want to respond to that also. Yeah.
I think most companies who are really making investment in AI are understanding that there's a governance process around it, and it's not just the CIO. They used to, call us, the just say no people. I now have a whole team around me who are, the just say no people that review what are the legal implications of this. If it has to do with making decisions about employees, what are the diversity, equity, and inclusion implications of this. We have cybersecurity involved. There's always somebody really evaluating the tech deeply to understand that. So at our company, at Juniper, we've done that. I've spent a lot of time talking, and I see it increasingly with my CIO peers that this is going on in companies, which is frustrating to people because everybody, has technology and they want to go fast. But we're trying to make sure that we're doing no harm to our customers, doing no harm to our employees, and protecting the company's IP, because we're responsible for 10,000 employees, and we don't want to do something crazy that's going to put all of their livelihoods at risk, right? So there are practices in the enterprise. I think different companies are at different levels of maturity, and the other thing is it's very hard to stay in a large organization on top of everybody. So not everybody has listened, read, understood the rules of that game, but I do think enterprises are trying.
Yeah, so I want to take it up level to that society aspect that you mentioned. How do we respond as a society? So two things that I want to mention or address is, one, what happens to jobs? This is a question everybody's asking. So every platform shift will affect the jobs as it exists today. Automated textile looms made handloom go away, or agricultural machines in farms made traditional forms of manual agriculture go away. That is inevitable. We have to be prepared. We've seen this across the centuries. So with AI, jobs will fall into three buckets. Jobs that will get drained, means they will go away, they'll get replaced because they're no longer necessary. Jobs that will get changed, which is what will happen to most of our jobs. We'll still may do those jobs, but in a very different way. Like what ATMs did to the role of bank tellers, who became more of customer service officers. And third, jobs that will be gained, new jobs that we do not even know about today, that will become very relevant because AI has opened up the doors, much like the web did that with web design and data scientists, et cetera, roles that did not exist before. So jobs that will be drained, jobs that will be changed, jobs that will be gained. The second aspect that we want to talk about is safety, guardrails, governance, all of this. They may not exist today, but I'm very confident that as a society, as a group working in this area, we will establish it. This is what human beings are very good at. It may take a little time, a lot of thinking and discussion. I'll use one analogy to see how that has evolved. Take fire, for example. When our ancestors discovered it, the first week there must have been excitement, saying, look at this orange dancing thing. It warms our caves and it cooks our antelope and it's more tasty and digestible. But in week 3, they started seeing the risks that you could put your hand in, it burnt your fingers. And worse, the neighboring tribe is using it to weaponize fire. But over time, we've developed lots of guardrails, checks and balances. I don't sit in this building and worry about fire because I'm sure there's fire safety systems built into this building. And before this building could be occupied, an independent third party had to come and certify it, saying it's fire safe. This is why we are comfortable in 100-story buildings, because the guardrails for keeping the building safe from fire is in there. Despite that, things can go wrong. So what have we done? In every city, town in the world, there's an independent group of experts called the firehouse, which will respond immediately if there's a problem. We don't yet have that for AI, but you can imagine that in the future. Despite that, people still will deliberately try to cause harm with fire. So every society in the world has built penal codes for arson. So over time, we've evolved the checks and balances. Now we feel quite safe around fire. It's in our oven, it's in our fireplace, and we are feeling comfortable with it. With AI, we need to put that in place, and that's what everyone is debating and discussing. And I'm very confident that as humans, this is what we are good at. We will eventually evolve the systems that will provide the boundaries for safe and incredible use of AI. Go ahead.
I mean, one of the things that you bring up, so I'm going to continue this metaphor of fire for a moment, is that every different role in society, regardless of what it was, took the time to understand what fire meant to them.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were cooking, you understood what fire meant to you. If you were building homes, you understood what fire meant to you. AI, I believe, seems to be in the same place. The 5 of us, I'm going to put a bet here that 5 years ago, we barely knew how to spell AI, right? For a while, I was calling it IA. I mean, I was really messed up. So it would seem prudent that regardless of what your role is, right, and no matter how quote unquote advanced or forward looking you might see it, especially I have the misfortune of knowing a lot of doctors, right? They're convinced nothing applies to them. This applies to them.
In a big way.
They need to become familiar with how does AI change, what does it mean to be a doctor? So you don't need to be an expert in language models, you need to be an expert in how AI changes your role. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Martin, what am I missing?
Interesting, and so I'll be giving a talk this afternoon about some of these ideas, but there's this thing that I'm started to call a selective upgrade puzzle that we're seeing in the workplace. So you could use the same tools for the same job, and depending on certain factors of who you are, you might actually improve your performance or you might actually hurt your performance. And there's some studies done in management consult, like in BCG, where I spent some time in, other studies done in accelerator programs with entrepreneurs, where you give top-performing entrepreneurs, top-performing consultants, and they do a lot better. And then the bottom-performing do a lot worse. And as someone who's maybe adopting this technology, to be very skeptical and careful as to when is it that I can adopt this so that it actually accelerates my performance and not unknowingly hurts my performance. I think that's such an important kind of amount of good judgment we need to figure out how to get into our instincts. And it's not clear to me that training people on how to use it is the final answer. Because I think we are either prone to being over-optimistic about these tools or a little bit pessimistic. And how do we, and this is where kind of my world collide with the enterprise world, there's so much human behavior and human psychology that gets into this and could create big problems so think about those studies and think about if you extrapolate that 5-10 years across an entire organization, what you might see is this widening of the gap between people who are high performers and low performers. And so this thing that people, has gotten popular, this adage of like, AI won't take your job, but the person who knows AI will. That's actually a pretty incomplete statement. Like the answer is, people who know AI might take your job, but they also might hurt their own performance in the process.
This brings up safety, and I think kind of a whole separate conversation about, there's a lot of questions that I know I'm hearing from my customers about, do I want to run this in the cloud? Now I realize the irony of saying this in a building that's largely funded by Google, right? But we got 2 Google folks on the stage. So, but I'm going to end up talking to the non-Google folks for a moment. Non-Google people, the on-prem, I keep getting the questions from enterprise customers, especially those in regulated markets, that on-prem is super important to them. Like, are they for real, or is this their hallucination?
Well, first I'll remind you that while we read about the cloud constantly, only second to AI perhaps, it's still a relatively small number of enterprises that live entirely in the cloud. I think less than 20%. So most stuff is still either on-prem or in a data center managed by, or where the systems are managed by the organization itself. We see both cloud companies and enterprises building NVIDIA-powered AI clusters. And we're so much so that we're building networking equipment to facilitate that. So I'm a firm believer that you will see both. When I evaluate technology, I do it based on the workload and the data gravity. And there's certain characteristics of commitment and control. We call commitment, how long are you certain that workload is going to be there, and how long is it running constantly? And control is your perceived need to control the platform on which it runs, whether that's from a security perspective or maybe underlying hardware has impact on the workload. And that leads us to choose the appropriate place. And so I think we will see AI in the cloud, and I think we will see AI on-prem. For our networking product, we firmly believe it needs to run in the cloud because of the visibility it needs across a broad spectrum of devices that can't communicate with each other easily other than through the cloud. But that's not going to be true for every use case and every problem.
Rand, I imagine you're seeing a lot of that same conversation as well. What's the word like from the other side?
Yeah, so we're constantly having this conversation with our customers, and we think the shift probably to, on the, it's more about a hybrid strategy the enterprise want to adopt rather than should I be in the cloud or should I be, build my own data center and on-prem. So it's really where you want your data to be live and what features the cloud provider, obviously like GCP, AWS, they have tons of great products. But also, when you think about some of the data privacy and like customer data, you might want to host it like on-prem. So I think it needs to be a completely thought through, but also I think there is also a cost part of it, to run those data center on-prem versus just leverage the managed services. And I think from NVIDIA perspective, we like to meet where the customer are. So we offer our services both in our great partners like Google, Amazon, as well as we offer services through the data centers such as like CoreWeave, etc. So we just want to make sure we can meet the customer needs wherever the customer wants to be.
And the hybrid makes a lot of sense because I was recently speaking with a company in the aerospace universe that sold to the Department of Defense. They do not run things in the cloud. They were pretty blunt about that. That said, they turned around and started asking for a bunch of capabilities. And I said, they're all nice, but you understand that you need to use Gemini for that, right? And that there was kind of a disconnect there. And I was, Gopi, I imagine that you're seeing some of that as well, that there are capabilities that are going to be cloud only and will, for the foreseeable future, only be possible in the cloud. What are you seeing from that side?
Yeah, and there is definitely a mentality shift that is needed here, and you talked about trust and letting go of control. But in many cases, actually, enterprises are much better off putting things out in the cloud. Just take security itself as an example. Companies that provide these cloud services fend off security problems all the time. They have some of the world's top security experts. And the way they have to secure their own data centers, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, no other enterprise will get to that level because what they have to do to protect their core business. But when you go off to a medium-sized business like a small regional bank, their capabilities at security are not going to be at the same level. This is not their core competency, and nor should they even be investing in it. That'll be distraction for the core business. And I think you're much better off letting that be handled by companies, these big providers that have the expertise to do it. And I can quote endless examples, but still.
I can quote the opposite. So let's talk about Microsoft, right? One of the world's largest corporations, security provider, and many of enterprises' security incidents have started with them. So it's not that simple. I'd like it to be that simple because it would be an easy answer for me to say, hey, I don't have to worry about security anymore. But I do think for smaller...
Of course, Sharon is going to argue for that. I provide the world's best security.
No, I don't think it's that simple.
But it feels like it's very use case driven. There are just certain use cases, especially those when you start getting into sensitive data and so on, that becomes key. You want to make sure that you have thoughtfulness about where it works, where it doesn't.
And I think you have to, as Gopi points out, you have to understand your capabilities and your provider's capabilities, and whether or not that should be something you're doing. But I think that there's certain large enterprises that have to invest in security, whether it's their core competency or not, and so that plenty of them are certainly thinking. And then the other thing I was going to point out is I've spoken with customers from different parts of the world who are reluctant to use our AI product for their network because they live in parts of the world where the internet gets turned off. So countries like Egypt, countries with less stable governments than hopefully the United States, is, and they worry about cloud products because they're not sure what's going to happen when the government shuts off their connectivity. So I think the world is going to be, for a long time, looking to have both options available to them.
As I'm reading my questions off the cloud. So we've got 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we end on somewhat of a positive note, because it feels like I started with, here's all of the amazing use cases you can have, and let's run through every way it's going to go wrong. And I don't think that's a fair assessment of AI, far from it. Generative AI has tremendous potential, and agentic AI in particular is something that we will see a lot of and will be pervasive across everything we do. I was hoping that each of you might be able to share some places where you believe that there's going to be, either some success stories, places that you've been able to come back and say, you know what, forget the marketing spiel. Let me tell you about somebody who's actually done something concrete. And maybe Gopi, if you don't mind starting with that.
I'll go back to the example of, you said, medical, how doctors are prepared for. And Sharon also was referring to the fact that AI is good, and machines are good at solving some problems that human cannot. So I'll leave you with one example that I find particularly inspiring. It's the kind of problem solving that I'm most hopeful for in AI. India has 1.8 billion people, and there are people in India who die of tuberculosis. This is unconscionable because tuberculosis is a perfectly preventable disease. We have solved for it, provided you get detected for it. So why are people not getting detected? It's due to a shortage of radiologists. India has 20,000 radiologists, one for roughly every 100,000 people, much lower than the ratio of radiologists to citizens or patients. So traditional ways, let's educate more radiologists and put them out in the market, is not going to work. It takes years, and there are not that many people lining up to become radiologists. So we have to think of out-of-the-box solutions. And one of the solutions some healthcare providers are working on, and it's currently in prototype with several providers, is they send X-ray equipment on trucks, on vans, to rural areas to take X-ray scans. And then they use AI systems, which are pretty good at this, at reading X-rays. You can train them in detecting people who are susceptible to breast cancer or tuberculosis. And the people that are triaged out of it are then sent to these specialized radiologists, the few that are available, so they can do the next level of detection. And that might be the only way we can scale and provide better radiology services. So it's the specialist radiology doctors working in tandem with AI systems doing the first level of triaging. And that's one example of doctors now thinking about a different way by scaling their expertise with AI being a companion to their work. Those kind of examples of how we solve problems in basic human conditions around health, around housing, around food, around education is what I'm most excited by.
Awesome. Sharon, I would love to hear a story that you've gone and solved with AI.
Yeah, so ours aren't solving such weighty world issues of this, but we're already using, again, we use AI to run our network much better. We're already using it to generate more revenue by being able to respond to more RFPs than we would have been able to prior to the advent of Gen AI. We're using it to create documentation in many more languages to serve more of our customers in their native languages than we were able to before. There's a long, long list of things that are already possible and capable if they're run and managed in the right way. And people shouldn't be afraid to be putting their toes in the water on this. And while you're thinking of what's that, big, massive problem you might be able to solve to really light your strategy on fire, there are many, many things that we can be doing to learn about it today.
Ran, what's your success story?
Yeah, so I think right now we're in the agentic AI wave, and one interesting use case we've done together with Accenture is in Accenture, they usually write some sort of industry report like every month, and we create the digital AI assistant specific for different use case. So some of them can prompt to do research, some of them can look at the previous report, and then some of them can prompt you to think about the questions you wanted to answer in those reports. And those digital assistants will work with each other to reasoning to come up with a report. I think this is where we're super excited about is the different AI which are specialized for different areas. They'll work together to reasoning to generate those reports. Again, from overall employee productivity perspective, I think this is really take it to the next level. So those are some of the exciting work happening right now.
I'm most excited about the use cases around sustainability and climate change. We have researchers looking at how listening to the songs of whales can help you predict the shifting of the climate in certain areas. Other startups I've been supporting would set up just cheap microphones around a rainforest, and it allows them to then detect from a distance, someone who's maybe illegally logging this rainforest, and I'm excited for that. Now you might say, well, but all this AI is going to take up a lot of energy, which is the next. If you're in for investing, you should invest in energy. Well, we're also then figuring out could we put these data centers, which by the way, the biggest drain of energy is in cooling these systems. Well, can we put them in some of the coolest parts of the universe, like in outer space? And that's some of the things that are being worked on as well now. Could we have these wafers up in the sky so we don't use as much energy? So I'm really excited about all those use cases.
So I will share a nowhere near as noble of a cause, a success case where reading the tax code and helping out the accounting team to be able to figure out what the taxation should be. And by doing that, they were able to find not only time savings, they got their weekends back, but they also were able to see savings along the way. So we're not listening to whale songs, but...
I just do that out on the Monterey Bay.
Look, when I hear I can pay less tax, that sounds like a song
I was
to me.
about to say,
You're making money, not paying taxes.
that
Yeah,
one.
that's a good use case.
So with that note, I want to thank each and every one of you. You shared wonderful stories today, both the strengths and the forward-looking stuff, as well as some of the challenges we're facing today and how we're overcoming them. With that, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you.